There's been cautious optimism about the country's economic trajectory. Experts say the recent shifts in fiscal strategy driven by ongoing reforms and an improved political landscape signal that South Africa is edging closer to a new phase of stability and growth. But is this enough to shape the ongoing growth trajectory? And what other enablers are needed? To answer these questions, I am joined by Albert Botha. He's the head of fixed income investments at Ashburton. Welcome. And Lisette IJssel, the Schepper. She's the chief economist at BER. And welcome to you too. Thank you for making time to speak to us here on the SABC News channel. The environment right now and the tone from the market as well as commentators to both of you is different this time around. Last year we were talking about how what a tightrope the minister needed to walk. This time it is one of optimism where constant reforms and improvement in political landscape. Are these kind of things what was needed all along? Perhaps let me start with you, Albert, and then I'll come to our next guest.
Good afternoon. It's good to be here. So I think a lot of the things that are needed are surely coming along. But it is important to note that when you look at the speeches by the finance minister, is that he's but one part of a broader machine, right? You've mentioned that some of these things need to be done. From a previous guest that mentioned things are required on the growth side. The minister is responsible for balancing a budget, certain growth initiatives, etc. However, he does need a little bit of support from the rest of the cabinet and the rest of the government to ensure that specifically things on the growth side starts picking up.
Yeah. Lisette, let me hear from you. Earlier on, just before we had those technical challenges, I hope you both did listen to the insert that my colleague Glorious Fakomusi played about fiscal anchors. And, you know, the different commentators were talking about what sort of fiscal anchors are needed. In your view, what do you think, which fiscal anchors should be given attention to?
Good afternoon. Well, a fiscal anchor at the end of the day is a bit of a theoretical concept. It is important for the government to keep their books in balance, and it is important for them to cut back unnecessary spending and to try to get as much revenue without hurting the economy. But you can technically set a target at any specific level and not necessarily achieve the goals that you want. At the moment, Treasury is working with sort of a soft goal of having a primary budget surplus. So that excludes the money that we pay back on debt, which of course is a lot. I don't know if we'll see a firm commitment on a financial target this budget. I'm not sure if it's that important to get a firm commitment on a fiscal anchor. What we do need to see is a firm commitment on a continued drive to see fiscal consolidation while focusing on getting growth initiatives going. So infrastructure spending, spending to improve the economy.
Yeah. Right now, there's a lot of talk about things like the wage bill as one of the things that this is going to be coming up much more prominently, Albert, tomorrow. To what extent do you think that this should be given attention to by the minister to appease the market and to get to the soft goal that Lisette speaks to?
So the wage bill is always one of the things that can cause budgets to diverge slightly from forecasts. We have seen that historically. And it is always one of the areas where you can get a little bit into the difficulties of trying to balance the employees in government and the outcomes people want from that government. So I think it needs to be a large part of the conversation, and ensuring that you set goals that are achievable and sustainable, that you don't go into the conversation and into the budget setting yourself unrealistic goals, effectively communicating both a willingness to restrain spending to the market without seeming unreasonable to the stakeholders in government and employees, etc.
Lisette, let's talk about fiscal leakages. At the end of the day, we have not found a gap or a stop measure for this fiscal leakages that have been flagged by the Auditor General as well. What strategies do you think should be employed by this government right now to stop and try this fiscal leakages?
Well, that is a difficult problem because it is a problem throughout government. So it trickles all the way down to a local government level where I think most of the leakages and wasteful expenditures happen. So you need a strategy that is focused on a local government level and make sure that the expenditures and the processes followed at that level are done accordingly. And then it sort of works its way up throughout the rest of government. In addition to leakages and wasteful expenditure, we also have a problem in South Africa that sometimes not all the expenditure that is allocated is actually spent, especially when it comes to large infrastructure budgets. Then Treasury does make money available. There is money for infrastructure that we need, but then it's not spent accordingly. And that is also, I think, a significant problem in South Africa.
Yeah, we also know about the fact that government still needs to create an enabling environment for the private sector to be able to deliver, to have certain deliverables. Lisette, let's talk about what he should be focusing on to make sure that companies and private sector are able to help the economy grow. There's been a raft of measures such as incentives, for instance, that have been announced here and there, whether it's the employment tax incentive, the renewable incentives. How relevant are they? Are they still needed, or can they be looked at differently this time around? Perhaps Lisette?
Oh, sorry. I think the most important role that government needs to play is to provide a business environment where it is conducive to do business, to bring down the cost of business in general in South Africa. Instead of focusing too much on isolated sectors and having policy incentives that are specifically relevant for specific subsectors in the economy, the biggest boost to the economy would be if it is able to lower the cost of doing business by bringing down the administrative burden that comes with running a business, for example, and providing a confidence boost. Confidence is the cheapest way to get economic growth going. So if we see a credible and committed budget with money flowing to the right projects, that will help with the confidence lift that we start to see.
Yeah. Albert, do you agree with what Lisette is saying?
I agree completely. I think it's one of the things that quite often gets said when it comes to government intervention, not just in South Africa, but overseas and in other economies as well, is that government shouldn't be in the business of picking winners and losers. They should be in the business of enabling businesses and enabling the market to function properly. If we see, for example, the amount of power that's been brought online over the last couple of years, when government changed the regulations surrounding independent power supply, we saw how the private sector stepped up and effectively allowed municipalities and many others to breathe a sigh of relief in a lot of areas. In much the same way, I think the government should look at the areas that are the primary sticking points, things like, for example, ports that I know they've already identified themselves, and then see how much they can prioritize some of those issues rather than picking certain sectors or certain segments for specific focus.
Yeah. Albert, at the end of the day, it is the people of South Africa that needs to be served by this budget. And when we look at the sentiment and how it changed since May, or rather June, when the GNU came into effect, should this budget not meet the expectations of the market, what would happen to the currency? We've seen, it's been a while since we've seen it around 17 Rand to the US dollar.
So I think that the risk of the government not meeting expectations on this budget is relatively low. For the last couple of years, both the Treasury as well as the SAB has been very good at communicating ahead of time and ensuring that the market is aware of what is coming up. So I think that the risks around that is meaningfully low. A very, very poor budget or one with a couple of surprises might negatively affect the currency. But as you've correctly stated, the Rand has rallied from somewhere close to 20 to not a couple of weeks ago, it was trading just above 17 on many of the developments we've seen, specifically coming out of the GNU, etc. I want to actually quote my colleague on the call.
Sure.
The BER recently released their new economic GDP forecast numbers for next year, and seeing that coming in at 2.2 is I think would be the highest number in over a decade. So if we can keep the momentum we've maintained, then I think it would be good for us. And I think government is committed to it. So I think the risk of a difficult budget or a budget that surprises to the downside is quite low.
Wow. Lisette, what do you think? I'd like you to also focus a little bit on what the rating agencies would look at this and think, oh yeah, they're going on the right track. We may look at changing the grading at sometime in future.
Yeah, hopefully after the budget, they'll agree that we are on the right track. But the rating agencies will be cautious. They will not necessarily start upgrading all rating just after a budget. But what we could start seeing is that they start upgrading our outlook to positive, where they're suggesting that if you continue to, keep going, stay on course, get growth going, then we will start talking about upgrades.
And when we talk about the men on the street, this is our viewers who are watching us today. They would also want to know, how would this eventually change my life as a Mrs. Khumalo, as a Mr. Mofokeng? What do you think they should look out for when they listen out at 2 p.m. Tomorrow, Lisette? And then, Albert, you can take it immediately after that.
Yeah, so the medium-term policy statement is not necessarily where you will see major changes to your tax rate or to the VAT regime or something like that. So on a direct impact to the consumer, the impact should be limited if there are no major surprises in the budget. But of course, it will be interesting to see where Treasury sees growth going, where they will channel their expenditure going forward. I think especially for low-income households, there will be particular interest around the social relief of distress grant. Is that going to morph into some sort of basic income grant over time? Is there any mention about something like the national health insurance?
Yeah.
So on both fronts, we don't expect an answer, but there might be some hinting towards what will happen in the future in the mini budget.
Yeah, got it. Albert?
So I think long term is the hope for growth for the average man on the street is the best way that they can effectively see their lives improving. We have in South Africa roughly 19 million people on grants and about 7 million people paying tax. And you honestly want to switch those two numbers around. You want to increase the number of taxpayers, and you do that by creating growth. Because it's the only real way we can lift the majority of Africans out of poverty. So there's going to be focus on the SRD grant. I agree completely. But long term, ensuring that the economy grows and that there's more for everyone, that the size of the pie increases. Then there's fewer conversations how we split the small pie, rather we can hopefully celebrate that the pie is now larger.
Right. Thank you so much to both of you, my guests today, ahead of the midterm budget tomorrow at 2 p.m. I've been joined by Albert Botha. He's the head of fixed income investments at Ashburton, and Lisette Schepper. She's the chief economist at the Bureau for Economic Research. And we do thank you very much for their time and sharing their insights with us.